On today's edition of Newsbeat, we're going to continue the conversation about the debate regarding critical race theory and the indoctrination of wokeness throughout elementary school, including kindergartners. Also on the West Coast, Union Pacific Railroad is fed up with the continued lawlessness and vandalism happening on their tracks. And they've now made a very dramatic threat which could interrupt commerce across the country. We will give you the details. And comedian activist Jon Stewart's latest project is advocating for veterans suffering from exposure to toxic burn pits. We're going to talk to our own Jesse Ventura and why these soldiers are not being given the care they deserve. I'm Skynell Hughes. These stories, plus the latest on Ghislaine Maxwell, who has officially filed for a new trial. Lots to address, so let's get started. Thanks for joining me. You know, critical race theory and the debate over it is in its unsettling worldview is taking hold in public schools across the country, and it's being drilled into students as younger and younger ages. But in their turn to CRT, our schools trading the ideal education for one of indoctrination. Now, I want to consider one California school district responsible for 19,000 students. Now, that seems to be at the forefront of this ominous trend. Hayward Unified School District has dedicated more than $120,000 to CRT training programs, including a $57,000 contract to an organization called, get this, Woke Kindergarten. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it. The whole mission is to teach teachers and staff in public schools how to disrupt whiteness, and that is just the tip of this iceberg. So to discuss, we're joined by educator Luther Mercer, a poll child strategist. Luther, thanks for joining me. Okay. Critical race theory, wokeness, it's things that, I don't want them to be emotional. That's what they kind of sound like, but we really need to talk about this curriculum because we're not focusing on ABCs and 2 + 2 = 4 anymore. We're now finding different agendas, whether you're what part of the country you live in, being put in as young as kindergarten. 4% of the 19,000 students at Hayward Unified School District identify, and I love this, identify as white. And the fact that we're even identifying, we're having to identify as racial groups. But woke kindergarten and other groups, trafficking and critical race theory often portray whiteness as this evil while making students hyper-conscious of their differences instead of creating what I would want to do, a shared sense of community and citizenship and unification. So how damaging do you think is this for this type of curriculum to be in the Hayward district, or even more broadly, where there's basically these small minorities? Could critical race theory actually undermine their education?
Well, Scotty, thank you for having me. There's a lot to unpack.
Oh, there
what you
is.
just said. Yeah, so let me begin by saying that, again, I think the conversation has always been in this country, even when we began in this conversation about diversity, et cetera. How do we talk about our collective history? That's been an important issue. But now I think because of some of the dynamics that's been created, oftentimes, even when you have me on this program, the challenge has become, okay, what are we actually talking about? Because there are so many dynamics to these organizations that have appeared with these various agendas and these various dynamics of who they're supposed to represent, what they're supposed to be representing, and how they're supposed to appeal to the dynamic of education, the dynamic of moving our society forward. So to break that down just back to a part of your question, I think that I haven't seen the woke education full curriculum, but I will say this, that even I was disturbed, challenged by what is this title, what does it mean, and then what comes out of the brief understandings that I have of the way in which they characterize this around education and moving us forward as a country. And so I think, again, extremes that have began to dominate the conversation and moved us away from the primary learning of the differences, our ethnic backgrounds, our collective history to move us forward as a country, I think is being lost in this.
Well, and that's the thing that's kind of frustrating. You're right. It's a very hard conversation. I'm tiptoeing around writing the questions because I don't want to insult, and my heart is in the right place on it. But let's just call it what it is. Racial issues are very hard to have conversations about as adults. Children at least can be more honest with each other, and their intentions hopefully are good. But once again, we're talking about school systems. In the United States, as compared to schools around the world, we're already suffering. Our students are already well below where you're seeing students score in Asia, in certain European countries. So how would schools better serve students with all this money they're shelling out to organizations? Don't we have more time? Shouldn't we be spending this time actually focusing on the academics, the 2 + 2s, rather than having the social conversation? And is this only happening because we're not comfortable for how it's happening around the dinner table in the households right now?
Well, I think you're touching on, again,
Lots to unpack
there. Yeah, but you're touching on several things that I think are important. One, the fundamental basis of education and what we are now, I guess, talking about, it seems to be two different things. And something that hits home with me as a former educator, as someone who's been an advocate in the educational space, has been the achievement gap for many years. How do we make sure that we are closing that gap and meeting the needs of children to basically have a basic, strong educational platform in order for them to be able to achieve in this country? Second, I do believe there's a conversation that needs to be had at home as well as in school, around, again, a collective history, a diversity, what it means to be for our country, why the founders in the beginning of this country, looking at and seeing these dynamics as they're going to evolve, what these things can be, again, how we're going to have to apply these things over time.
Right.
But now, I don't think we are meeting some of those conversations with the idea that if we just focus on race or just the construct of the challenges of ethnicity around our system, if we do this, then somehow magically our children will be educated and we're going to be able to move forward. I think these are things that really pull to me because we're not moving forward and we're not addressing those fundamental problems that really are the ones that are able to be addressed in an objective and critical way.
Well, and we need to address those. And unfortunately, that's not something that we can do in a 7-minute segment. But Luther, we're going to continue this conversation. I appreciate you for having it with me.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Now, there's a virtual roundtable with the House Veterans Affairs Committee. They saw an emotionally charged testimony by Jon Stewart, part comedian, part news anchor. Now, a satirical take on current events made Daily Show successful. But he left TV years ago for advocacy to 9/11 first responders and now veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq who suffer from these crippling health problems because of toxic fumes from burn pits. Here's some of what he told the committee.
How do we implement first-rate toxic exposure healthcare for our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans so that they can receive, in the way that the VA and DoD have gotten better with traumatic brain injury and PTS?
Well, let's turn to veteran and former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura, host World According to Jesse here on RT America. Thanks for joining me, Jesse. Very important topic. I wish I could devote an entire show to it. Maybe in the future we can. But I want to highlight this now. So tell me, how often do service members come in contact with these burn pits when they're out on a mission?
Well, first and foremost, they don't come in contact with them on a mission. They're on the edge of the bases. It's where they get rid of toxic waste. We had the same problem in Vietnam. It was called Agent Orange. And many of the servicemen suffered from it. Our country ignored it for decades, for literally decades. Why? Because they wanted everybody who was inflicted by it to die. That way they don't have to deal with it. And this is the same thing. These burn pits were used to get rid of chemicals, get rid of all sorts of stuff. They polluted. I believe it killed President Biden's son eventually. And what the government will do now, they'll ignore it. They'll stall it out. They'll stall it out until everybody who's afflicted is dead and gone, and then they don't have to ante up. You got to remember something. When you're finished with your military service, the government wants you to go away. They don't want to see you anymore. I left and went in the Navy. When I went in the Navy, I had zero money. I got out for 50 years and have worked and become successful. I can't even go to a VA hospital today. I'm not accepted because I'm not homeless. So that's the point. And then you look at TV and you see all these ads to support our veterans, wounded warriors and all those. Well, shouldn't the government be taking care of the veterans? After all, they sent them to war in the first place, but no. When they come home, they abandon them. And that's exactly what you have here with these burn pits. These things were illegal to begin with. And it's also like Agent Orange, chemical warfare. Since when is that allowed?
Well, and that's the thing. And the problem is you don't get these highlights until somebody like Jon Stewart appears in front of Congress in a testimony that people start talking about it. But he also brought something else that says a lot about congressional priorities up. Take a listen.
Access to a system that doesn't understand toxic exposure doesn't help anybody. There's a burn pit center for excellence at the VA. Its funding is $6 to $7 million a year. That's in 2022, 15 years after the DoD and the VA knew that this storm was coming. To give you just a perspective on that, they spend $90 million a year on Viagra.
Once again, this just shows that those in Congress don't understand what those on the battlefield, those in our military, what actually serves them, what they actually need. What do you think about this? The fact that Viagra, that's what they think they need rather than actually oxygen to their lungs? I mean, it's frustrating and it makes me angry.
Well, you should get angry about it. And for me, I think it should be put on all ads to go into the military, that young people be made aware that they're going to be put in danger, that they could well die or suffer from things, and that the government will then ignore them after they get out. Because that's essentially being a Vietnam veteran. That's exactly what they did to us on Agent Orange, and it's exactly what they're doing now with these burn pits. As I said earlier, Scotty, they just stall things out. They want all the people afflicted, and believe me, many people don't die from a bullet in war. People die from this stuff in war. And the point is they're waiting for all of them to die, and then they don't have to pay up or ante up. And people need to understand that the country doesn't care about you after you're done serving them. And you need a clear knowledge of that before you join.
Well, and that's the thing I would hate to see in the future, and I understand where people need to know what they're getting themselves into, but it's almost like you need a disclaimer, like you see in those medicine ads at the end saying, you know, people who take this, people who enlist in the Army, this is what comes to you. Nobody would join. You understand that if you actually laid it out for them. But once again, it comes down to they like to pay the lip service, but we're dealing with a military budget that is the largest ever in history. It's the largest part of our federal budget, and yet where does that money go? And how come it's not just 1 year, but it's year after year after year? That money is going to contractors and not going to our actual men and women who serve.
Exactly, Scotty. It's going to finance the military-industrial complex. That's where the money goes. These soldiers, sailors, and airmen, they're old news. They're dead issue. They're gone. They want them gone, out of the way, and forgotten. All the money goes to future wars and future conflicts so that they can all profit the military-industrial complex and their hardware and our economy. These guys are a threat to our economy. They don't want them around. They would rather produce stuff that helps the economy, which unfortunately we as the United States now have a military-industrial complex economy. We have to be at war at all times for our economy now to work.
Oh, it's very, very scary, but I'm glad I have you to help me continue to fight this battle. I'm proud to be along your side.
Thank you, Scotty. It's good to have you.
As more and more Americans find themselves fleeing blue states, you have to wonder why. Does it come down to just taxes, or is it policy as well? Well, the latest debacle in Southern California over a decision to not police certain areas is impacting a large percentage of their residents who are expecting packages and supplies through rail. RT correspondent Tasha Sweet has more on what transit authorities they are proposing.
Over the past 2 weeks alone, Union Pacific Rail is seeing their property littered with debris, and officials say at least 90 containers per day are being stolen.
Trash piling up through the 275 miles of track running through Los Angeles County. These shredded boxes, packages, and discarded products are a result from all the thefts happening, and they are continuing to skyrocket. Since December of 2020, the City of Angels has seen a 160% increase in criminal rail theft, and it continues to rise. In October of 2021 alone, thefts rose 356% compared to October of 2020. And while Union Pacific agents have made hundreds of arrests, the rail company says less than half are actually booked, and some are released in less than 24 hours. And now Union Pacific is threatening to leave Los Angeles. An official wrote a letter to the district attorney regarding his policies to lower criminal theft offenses. This comes at a time when looting rail cars is surging. In the letter, he said, quote, UP and our good movement partners strongly urge you to reconsider the policies detailed in Special Directive 2007. While we understand the well-intended social justice goals of the policy, we need our justice system to support our partnership efforts with local law enforcement, hold these criminals accountable, and most important, help protect our employees and the critical local and national rail network.
And while cleaning efforts are underway, what you're seeing here is mail that will not go to the intended. And as you know, opening or damaging someone else's mail is considered to be a federal crime. Reporting for Newsbeat Hughes, Natasha Sweet, RT.
Chris Andrew has been stripped of all of his military titles and now his Twitter. What could this mean for the royal, and does a new trial for Ghislaine Maxwell look to be in the near future? After the break, we're going to take a closer look at the colorful life of the British socialite, including her fall from grace. Stay with us. Ghislaine Maxwell remains in federal custody, all awaiting her fate. Well, whatever fate that might be. We're going to take a look back on the life and times of a woman who lived in luxury, mixing with the powerful and elite of her social life. Now she'll trade in her designer clothing for a prison jumpsuit. Now she faces spending the rest of her lifetime in jail. Here's RT's John Huddy.
There's a quote from Proverbs in the Bible reading, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Well, if there was one thing Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't short of, it was pride. The British socialite epitomized the lifestyle of the rich and famous, rubbing elbows with the powerful and elite. From Bill Clinton and Donald Trump to Elon Musk and every kind of celebrity, musicians, actors, royalty. The cameras adored her, but it's also been said that all glory is fleeting. The pictures of Maxwell with her diamonds and gowns sparkling in the spotlight have been replaced by muted courtroom sketches, an extraordinary life and an extraordinary downfall. The daughter of British media tycoon Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine lived a privileged life. The 9th child born on Christmas Day in 1961. Her brother, Ian Maxwell, said their father nicknamed Ghislaine Sprat, as in a tiny fish. Her youth was like a fairy tale. Growing up in the 50-room mansion, Headington Hill Hall in Oxford, England, the Maxwells had private jets, helicopters, nannies, maids, and butlers. Royalty without the official title. Ghislaine was often a fixture at her father's lavish parties, or sitting beside him at football matches. Robert Maxwell would name his 189-foot super yacht Lady Ghislaine after his beloved youngest child. It's on his yacht, in perhaps a cruel twist of fate, that the famed and feared Elder Maxwell would meet his demise, falling overboard into the Atlantic Ocean off the Canary Islands in 1991. His death and the ensuing pension fund scandal involving Maxwell's company would devastate his family. It's around this time, also in 1991, in perhaps another cruel twist of fate, that Ghislaine Maxwell would meet a young hedge fund manager named Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell and Epstein would develop an intimate relationship. They would vacation together in Europe, go on ski trips. Later, even after being lovers, they remained very close. Maxwell has been described as Epstein's business partner, properties manager, closest advisor, and friend. They would tend to his ranch in New Mexico, luxuriate at his mansion in West Palm Beach, and on his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James Island, later dubbed Pedophile Island. She even lived at Epstein's Upper East Side townhouse in Manhattan, where Epstein's bizarre artwork included this painting of Bill Clinton in a dress. And it's at all of these locations where the luxurious world of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, full of yachts and parties and powerful people connected to their social network, would also be described by their victims as a torturous nightmare, saying they were preyed upon by Maxwell and sexually abused by Epstein.
I was recruited at a very young age from Mar-a-Lago and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day, and I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice.
Virginia Roberts-Gouffre has been one of Maxwell and Epstein's most vocal and prominent victims, saying she met Maxwell and Epstein as a teenager while working at Mar-a-Lago, describing years of torment and abuse at their hands and others. Gouffre says Maxwell and Epstein forced her to have sex with Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, when she was just 17 years of age, alleging Andrew knew she was underage, like most of the young and poor girls who prosecutors say Maxwell and Epstein preyed upon. Andrew has adamantly denied the allegation, saying he doesn't even remember meeting her or taking a photo with her in Maxwell's London home.
You can say categorically that you don't recall meeting Virginia Roberts, dining with her, dancing with her at Tramp, or going on to have sex with her in a bedroom in a house in Belgravia.
I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
Do you recall any kind of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts then or any other time?
None whatsoever.
But this disastrous BBC interview in 2019 certainly did not help Andrew. He's now the subject of a potential criminal lawsuit by Gouffre, the Queen stripping Andrew of his official military titles and roles and his work with charities. But Andrew is not the only name snared in Maxwell's alleged web of lies and deceit. Her victims have named others who they say were part of the years of sex trafficking and abuse, from criminal defense attorney and former Epstein lawyer Alan Dershowitz to former U.S. Ambassador, Energy Secretary, and New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, and even former Israeli Prime Minister and longtime Epstein and Maxwell friend Ehud Barak, all of whom have denied the accusations against them, and all of whom are among the rich and powerful names in Epstein's little black book of contacts. Robert Maxwell had deep ties to Israel. Born Jewish, he was long rumored to be a Mossad agent. Buried on the Mount of Olives in Israel, his funeral was attended by then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and President Chaim Herzog. While Jeffrey Epstein may have also had ties, both public and secret, to Israel, his death would not receive the same royal treatment. The building on top of the island there, that's Epstein's main residence. On July 28, 2019, I visited Epstein's notorious Little St. James Island, getting a closer look by sea and by land. In fact, I was the last journalist to step foot on Little St. James Island before Epstein's death. 2 weeks later, on August 10, 2019, guards at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan would find Epstein's lifeless body in his jail cell. His death ruled a suicide. Maxwell would go into hiding before ultimately being hunted down and arrested in New Hampshire in 2020. But unlike Epstein, she would be forced to face her accusers in court. Her defense? That she was a victim too of Jeffrey Epstein, a pawn in his twisted game. Maxwell's brother Ian defended his little sister.
The reality is, all of this occurred 25 years ago, or 25 years ago. And we know that memory does funny things. We know that lawyers became involved, several lawyers representing the same women. The stories then begin to be starting to involve Ghislaine pretty much after the Epstein fund starts to become available. So it seems to me that there is a fundamental discrepancy between what was said in the past and what was said at the trial. It doesn't follow that lies have been said.
But the jury was not persuaded and found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of federal sex trafficking charges. Several of her alleged victims said justice was served.
I Wasn't sure that this day would ever come, and I just feel so grateful that the jury believed us and sent a strong message that perpetrators of sexual abuse and exploitation will be held accountable no matter how much power and privilege that they have.
It's still going to be a rough road, but I also wanted to thank all the survivors that had reached out to me as well and telling me their stories. It really means a lot. I'm here for anyone.
Maxwell remains at the MDC Maximum Security Jail in Brooklyn, just across the Hudson River from Lower Manhattan, where her trial was held, and where Jeffrey Epstein met his gruesome fate, their lives twisted together forever in scandal and shame. For RT, I'm John Huddy.